Julian begs the Joe Budden podcast for an interview?
Joe, I invited Ian and Imani to come on my show. How's that sound?
I mean, it sounds awesome to me. Amani do everybody's show.
Julian, never mind, man. I can't make it, man.
Yo, Julian extended an invite to you too, Flip.
To what?
This podcast.
He's here. I mean, he can extend it
We
again.
going we going on Julian pod, Flip.
Julian, Julian. I'm just running.
It's more than welcome. You can do that.
That's right, on Spaces, Julian has been cozying up to the Joe Budden podcast, the co-host, and all of that other jazz. And I must say, it's a little bit concerning. As you know, he was just on the Rory and Maul podcast. So what happened is basically there was a space where members of the show were on it. Imani threw a messy space with Ian Dunlap, Joe Budden, and Queens Flip. And it turns out that Julian would join. Well, during the space, it was pretty cool. Everybody was getting along, and I guess Julian felt emboldened enough to ask the whole cast for an interview. He asked Imani, he asked Flip, and he asked Joe. But I think it was a little bit awkward because it looked like the cast of the Joe Budden podcast was quite frankly playing around with Julian. I mean, there was even a point where Joe told Julian to get dressed because they were ready to go out for a night on the town.
Yo, Julian, get dressed, Julian.
Yo, Julian, we out.
Get dressed.
I have no idea.
Welcome to the dark side, Julian.
Now, we have to look at this from a zoomed out perspective. First of all, I wonder what Rory and Maul think. I'm pretty sure they didn't see this coming. Well, actually, it looks like Rory didn't see this coming, but Maul saw this coming. As on a recent episode, he didn't mention Julian by name, but just said he's really not surprised. Now, another part of this to look at is if you look at Julian's last episode of his podcast, he spends a significant amount of time breaking down this whole space interaction. And for me, it was quite jarring because it felt like a Joe Budden podcast reaction channel. And he's done a couple episodes like that. So my guess is Julian is doing his best to make his podcast hot, which I am not mad at, but I'm still a little bit shocked at. I remember when I first started critiquing Julian's pod, I was like, yo, he needs to do what he needs to do to make his podcast hot. But now seeing it play out, I think he's overdoing it because I've been noticing when I do my spaces, Julian joins, and I'm happy Julian joins. I think he's pretty great conversator. But every time there's somebody from another podcast, whether it be Ian Dunlap or Joe, Imani, Julian asks for them to be on. And it isn't like one ask, it's multiple ask. And I'm thinking like, oh, okay, this is a little bit too much. This is a little bit extra. And I know that Rory and Maul are looking at this like it's funny money. And if you look at the performance of Julian's podcast, I actually enjoyed the last episode. It was 52 minutes. I thought it moved really well and it was entertaining. I thought his dialogue about the Kendrick Drake thing and how you can listen to both was needed in this time of divisiveness where Kendrick and Drake are being positioned essentially as Democrats and Republicans. But I just don't know if begging essentially the Joe Budden podcast to come on his show is the direction he wants to go in. I would suggest back channels. You know, maybe Julian can DM Imani or other folks in the DMs. Because right now, it's playing out publicly, and I think it looks very, very nasty. But let me know what you think in the comments. Do you feel like this is what Julian should be doing? When he first appeared on Spaces with Joe, I think even though it was jarring, it felt a little bit more organic. It felt like, all right, this is a mix-up, a mashup of two worlds, and it felt cool. But then that last space that I was on with them, it felt odd. Can't lie, it was a little bit nasty. It was super nasty. Jenna Jameson. And I I don't know. I was like, I had to do a video about it. A week later, I was like, I kept thinking about this. Why is Julian cozying up to a podcast that is probably secretly laughing at him?
Nah, you freaked that poem. I caught the
Thank
subs
you.
in the poem. Low.
Nah, there's no sub.
Nah, yeah,
In that poem.
Nah, I don't eat sandwiches.
off in the haiku.
Is Julian trying to get on the Joe Budden podcast? I'm not going to lie. That probably would be a good thing. I think you need somebody like Julian to be a little bit more researched. He's probably one of the more well-researched people in the podcast game as someone who's just a mic, because his brother's in politics, so he knows a little bit more. And I think the Joe Budden podcast sorely needs that. When Mark Lamont Hill arrived, he became the grown-up in the room, but now when he's not there, you can see a great contrast. All right, Joe, I also wanted to end this video by talking about Ian Dunlap. So Ian Dunlap is seemingly going through a transition into being a member of the Joe Budden podcast. Now, I was shocked when I saw in the space community by the Twitter, the JBTV folks, that they asked for a vote, and they were like, yo, how many of you want Ian Dunlap on the podcast? And 75% voted no. Now, I actually think Ian would be a good addition to the show, but I was miffed at the number of people who don't want him on the show, and I was even more shocked at Ian's response. Listen to this. He went on Space's audio, and he said this.
And I do want to say this to anybody who may not be a fan. I appreciate you. Because the hate is helping damn near more than some of the fans support. So keep it up.
Basically, he was just like laughing about the people who voted for him not to be on the show. He was like crying, but I wasn't crying, but it was like a laugh cry. Like, I'm okay. I don't need y'all to like me. I'm still getting bread. And then he did it again.
And saying y'all don't want to hear me on a pod when I could have just went right to Rogan. It's crazy. But okay, gotcha. Oh man. Could have went CNBC. All right, great. If the culture not feeling me, please let me know so I can go ahead and sell out. Oh, I love y'all. Culture. Oh my God. Oh yeah. Oh.
So it just remains to be seen how Ian will be integrated into the show. I know on Spaces he's hinted at wanting equity in the show, but I wonder, how can you get equity in a show if you're not performing on said show? Now, I know you can throw money at it if you're like, hey man, here's $1 million. I want 3% of the Joe Budden network. But could it be one of those things where, I read a book about Twitter, hatching Twitter, and in it, it said that celebrities used to show up to the Twitter offices and ask and hang around and request that they get equity because they were making Twitter hot by tweeting. And the Twitter execs would always be like, that's not going to happen. Is that a situation where Ian is hanging around the show and participating in the podcast and throwing out the idea of equity, but it's never going to happen? I don't know. I know Ian's smart. I know he got the EYL thing. I know he got Red Panda. I know he got a crazy life he's living. But to actually become a owner, to become an equity partner, which Rory and Maul aren't, I only think really Ian and Joe are partners. Everybody else is just getting paid, and they're getting paid handsomely, I might add. But I don't think anybody is going to be on the company LLC except those two names. But let me know what you think. Do you find Ian's integration into the podcast odd? I think it's a little bit odd. I think Ian's trying to find his way. It's been tough for him. It is hard to fit in on that podcast, which is why when people tell me, Danny, you would love to be on the Joe Budden podcast. That's why you're so jealous of everybody who's on it. No, man. It would be so hard to fit in on that show. The last few hires haven't worked out. Ian, J1, it's been a tough go for those two folks. It's a hard podcast to fit into. See, Rory and Maul, they're on the opposite end. It's easy to fit in their podcast because there's not too many mics. So you see Eden, Julian, Damaris, even though there's fans who hate them, they still are able to carve an identity. They're able to be listened to. Whereas that doesn't happen on the Joe Budden podcast. There's like 6, 7, 8 mics at any given time. And I think Ian is suffering, and he's going to have a hard time finding his, bearing, unlike Mark Lamont Hill, who he's just a talented broadcaster. There's a difference between him, J1, and Ian. They're just not in the same ballpark. All right, y'all, that's my video for today. I am going live at 1 o'clock Eastern, 1 p.m. So tune in, tap in with me. I'm going to be talking in great detail about Ian's integration and the rest of the goings on in the world. Follow me on Instagram, The Stop TV. Follow me on Twitter, The Stop TV. This is Danny from The Stop. Peace.